welcome to the Fireside Chat with Raj, co-founder of Solana. So Kyle, when did you first meet Raj and Anatoly and learn about Solana?
I was introduced to Anatoly and Raj in either March or April of 2018, and I was in San Francisco for some event, and someone connected us over Telegram, and we ended up meeting at some co-working space. I remember it was a Saturday evening, and we sat down and started walking through proof of history and the whole blockchain design. And it was super informal. Anatoly didn't have a deck or anything. We were just talking, and he was explaining to me a hash chain, and I was like, now that I know Anatoly 2 years later, it was such a good representation of exactly how Anatoly is.
So Raj, what was your first perception of Kyle when you met him?
I mean, definitely super sharp. So I think from the outset, I had heard a few things about Kyle's very, thesis-driven investment style and just the level of conviction that he would have that was often a little bit contrarian. But seeing him in person and understanding his style of thinking and how it always came back to sort of first principles, really making sure that he had a fundamental belief in something that was independent of what the market was thinking or even what people would care about or agree with, was really refreshing, especially in the blockchain industry where there's so much following and so much kind of trend chasing, and oftentimes people aren't even really thinking about what underlies these trends. It was really good to have a conversation with Kyle, and it always has been. I mean, even till today, to hear about the core drivers behind why he believes something is going to be successful or why something is going to happen in the next year.
Had you heard of Multicoin before?
Yeah, vaguely. I had heard really good things, that it was a fund that was starting to perform really well, that the founders, particularly Kyle, who was the person that we were thinking about working with, was very hands-on and really put in a ton of work on behalf of portfolio companies, did a lot of thesis-driven writing and analysis that supported the companies. And so we had read a few of those things, and I remember us thinking how cool it would be to see a long-form write-up from Kyle or Tushar on Solana, because I think we were having trouble communicating and really synthesizing what made Solana tick in a way that was consumable for other people.
Yeah, one thing that's always been clear with Solana has just been there's so many new ways of thinking about how to solve these core technical problems, and figuring out how to really communicate those clearly in a digestible way has been a big challenge, and I think we've made a lot of progress.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we were originally pitching the idea of a decentralized exchange in addition to building the blockchain. And I think one of the reasons for that was that we weren't sure, if we just took this approach to scaling, which we believed was, more or less the right one, get out of the way of the hardware, scales with Moore's law, and built in a way that Anatoly had kind of learned the right design principles for a distributed system over several decades. Would people pay attention, or did we need to build the killer use case as well? And I think part of the conversations that we had in the early days was this idea that we would be able to communicate and we would be able to find traction and get the market to latch on to this scaling solution without building the killer use case, and that we would be able to find the right entrepreneurs and the right builders to come and build things that scale in really unique ways and then showcase the chain. And that has all actually played out pretty wonderfully with things like Serum.
Yeah, we've had so many debates over the last couple of years of how much do we do in-house, how much do we want the community to build, how do we attract entrepreneurs, and on different issues, figuring out the right balance of that has always been really tricky. But yeah, we're really fortunate now to have just an awesome group of people, both near the Solana team and then just completely independently pushing this thing forward.
So Raj, can you tell us a little more about your background and how you met Anatoly and how you ended up founding Solana?
Yeah, my background is actually in venture capital originally at General Catalyst Partners in Boston. And then I spent a lot of time in health tech, which is interesting. I see a lot of people move from health tech into blockchain, and I think there's a lot of really interesting reasons for that. I think, some of the present parties included. But I started a medical device company, which later sold, and then joined Omada Health, which is a behavioral health tech company, and they're approaching IPO. So definitely felt like I got enough experience in going from 0 to 20 people and 20 to 250 people and all of the accompanying growth metrics that came along with that, and wanted to bring that into a new space. And one of our co-founders in the team is actually Eric Williams, who was the VP of Data Science at Omada Health when I led product management. And he introduced me to Anatoly because they've known each other for 10 or 15 years. I actually met Anatoly camping with Eric the first time. That was probably six or 7 years ago now. And Anatoly, left Dropbox later on after Eric and I had both left Omada, and had just this fever dream and this really impressive level of conviction about this idea. And so Eric asked me to spend more time with Anatoly, and the ball sort of started rolling from there in late 2017, early 2018.
So much about what is exciting about Solana is the team. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the really amazing people that are on the team and what they've done before?
It's a crazy story, actually. Anatoly spent I think 10 or 12 years in distributed systems, operating systems, and embedded systems at Qualcomm. And he later led the compression team at Dropbox, and in between was at Mesosphere. And so it was really kind of a bringing back the band together type of thing that happened over the last couple of years of building the team at Solana. Most people in the engineering team worked in the core kernel team for the Brew operating system, which powered about a 500 million flip phones that ran Qualcomm chips from 2G to 4G.
What just for context, what is Brew like? What?
Brew is it's the operating system for flip phones. So back before there was Apple and an app store, they had I think the first billion app installs from independent developers making apps for Qualcomm chip-based handsets. And it was also the operating system that scaled all the way up through 2G to 4G. So kind of kept the same core kernel that Anatoly and I think really only a few dozen other engineers all built. And then there was a team of 200 to 400 other engineers and operating folks that actually brought that operating system to market. And also Anatoly and a lot of the other engineers that work at Solana now were part of the integration team that white labeled and worked with the OEMs, the handset manufacturers, to integrate this new operating system and new chipsets that Qualcomm was churning out every year. So they have a lot of experience with a really high pressure environment, every year shipping a complete new system to 1 billion people, and having a lot of third parties that are depending on these systems working together.
You want to tell us about the Iron Man?
So of the founding team at Solana, there are 5 of us, and the other 4 have all done the Ironman. So Anatoly, who's the founder and the architect, the creator of Solana. Eric Williams, who's the chief scientist, and he was the last to do the Ironman. Greg, who's the CTO, and Steven, who's a staff engineer, all have done the Ironman, which is I think you guys probably know about it, but it's like a full marathon and then something like over 200 miles of cycling and several miles of swimming. So I can't swim almost at all. So these days my excuse is just COVID. All right, I can't do it in the middle of COVID. So I'll do it at some point. I am a very competitive person, so it does eat me up inside, so thank you for asking.
I'm right there with you on the swimming part, especially.
After COVID,
I could run or cycle that much. So.
Yeah, maybe in a year I could do a complete Ironman if I really tried.
Yeah, just
over time. yeah, like daily little bits.
So Kyle, can you describe the big innovation behind Solana that really captured your attention and led to you wanting to make a big bet?
There are 8 kind of major innovations in Solana. They're like on the Solana homepage. You can see those. But I think there's a couple that really, 3 that really stand out to me as the most important. The first is kind of the foundation of the whole system, which is known as proof of history. Proof of history is a way to have a trust minimized clock in a permissionless open setting. So like if you think about like Bitcoin or any of the other proof of stake systems, the fundamental problem in all of these systems is how do we have a clock that everyone agrees on? And if we all agree on a clock, then we can order transactions. And proof of history of like all the major blockchain systems out there is a totally different approach, and it's a clock that actually runs before consensus. So that struck me as pretty important. All of the layer ones, as you kind of look into all of them, what you realize is they all have like their own shtick of like, this is like the thing that they like talk about, and it's kind of like their identity of like how they're special. And Solana was like, time is our thing. And the more I thought about it over the last couple of years, the more I've realized like time is really the kind of foundational thing in making all of these things work and work fast and in a performant way. And so with proof of history as a base, you can make all kinds of more aggressive assumptions up the stack in terms of consensus, transaction broadcasting, data propagation, a whole bunch of other things. So that was the first one. The second was parallel transaction processing. So all the major blockchain systems today, except for Solana, share a very interesting common trait, which is they're all single-threaded computers. So if you've got people sending transactions, all of these systems run those transactions in one after another instead of in parallel. And this obviously fundamentally limits performance of the system for pretty obvious reasons. Anatoly and the Solana team, they said, look, if we're gonna make this thing really support billions of users, like you have to be able to do things in parallel. And so Solana is the only one of these systems that supports in a single shard parallel transaction processing. And they have to do a bunch of interesting things to make that possible. And just for context, right, like modern GPUs today have like 4,000 cores, 5,000 cores, 10,000, something in that range. So by enabling parallelism, it's not that you're getting 2x or 4x increase in potential computational throughput. You're getting 1,000x, right, types of opportunities for performance improvements. And then the third is just data propagation. So during his time at Dropbox, he had to figure out like how to compress data, move data around, make sure it's resilient and redundant, and do so in a really high performance way so that the user experience is really smooth for end users. And for Solana, what he realized was, look, like the way that the other blockchains are actually propagating data between the nodes is not as efficient as it can be. So he looked at the BitTorrent protocol and kind of used that as an inspiration where you can deal with a lot of resiliency, a lot of packet loss, and ultimately propagate data between these nodes in a super high performance, super low latency way, and still make sure the system runs and all things come to consensus. And so those kind of three major things really give Solana a really unique edge in ultimately driving the performance of the system.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because it's really not reinventing the wheel, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier that everything that inspired Anatoly for the architecture for Solana is just kind of standing on the shoulders of giants and using what is generally like a set of universal truths in distributed systems that he learned over the past few decades. And one of the interesting, I think, ways to think about it, and this is just one component of why Solana's fast, but Anatoly always talks about TDMA, time division multiple access, which is effectively, I mean, if you just ask yourself the question, why can 30,000 people in a stadium all use their cell phones with three wireless towers around and not have a complete like noisy congestion of the system that breaks everything down? It's because there is a sense of time, a shared source of time across that network that they can then chop up and divide the actual spectrum of the network up by. So that's part of the reason that Solana's fast is there was never a source of time before consensus, and proof of history provides that. But it's not a computer science level innovation that required a professor and teams of academics to figure out. It was just really applying those principles in a distributed system like Solana, and that's why Anatoly always describes it as like blood, sweat, and tears. It was just writing the code was what took the time and the energy more than anything.
One thing that's really stuck out to me, having spoken to all the layer one teams, is the Solana team really seems to not want to have to solve any new computer science problems. They said, look, like there's a lot of known constraints in math, cryptography, physics, distributed systems, all these things. Let's assume that we can't have any Pareto improvements, and just how do we take all of the existing known limits and just make the optimal thing go as fast as we can. And so in a lot of ways, Solana was a lot less risky of a technical bet than a lot of the other alternatives. In other ways, it was more risky in that they just said, look, we're going to reconfigure all these things in a way that no one's ever done before. Although they're all independently known modules, no one's put them together. And so it was just kind of a different basket of technical risk, but ultimately one predicated on not trying to solve new fundamental computer science problems. And that always struck me as pretty interesting and really speaks to how I think the Solana team thinks about technical risk and like long-term strategic planning for where this thing is going to go.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of investors in the space don't really appreciate as much is how do I evaluate the technical risk that's involved in bringing this project to market? Because maybe they don't have the deep background or maybe they're not asking the right questions, but I think that that's one of the key questions that people don't really ask and they don't think hard enough about is, what needs to happen between now when the investment is happening and the product actually going live and mainnet existing in the real world. And is that just a deterministic process of we need to write a bunch of code and we know exactly what we need to write, but we just need to do it? Or is it a research process of we need to solve these fundamental computer science problems and then implement them after that, and it's an unknown amount of time until we solve those problems because we can't really forecast when someone's going to have a eureka moment?
Yeah, it's a really tough trade-off in all these things, and like there's pros and cons to both approaches. The Solana team has been pretty clear that like they want to let other people figure out the research problems, and then they'll just focus on sheer execution. And I really like that risk-reward kind of trade-off for us as investors.
Also, independent of the breakthroughs that happen in blockchain, just want to reiterate that so many of these breakthroughs in distributed systems have been taking place over, almost a century, really, since the first radio towers went up. A lot of these, congestion and messaging overhead and noise problems that you see causing scale issues in existing blockchains have been solved. And so it's sort of the design principles that were applied. It's not forking or reusing code, and that's the hard part. The code has to be rewritten. Yes, that's difficult. You need engineers. You have to put them in a room. They have to coordinate. They have to reapply these principles, and they have to understand how they might differ and how they might need to be adapted for something like a permissionless open source blockchain. But I think the bet that you guys made and that we were willing to make is that as long as we could get those engineers together, get them focused, get them fed and get them doing it, it would work. And so this year has been kind of a phenomenal eye-opening moment where we launched the mainnet and it does work and it works as advertised. And I think it definitely wouldn't have been quite as possible without you guys supporting us in that.
So Raj, can you tell us a little bit about the fundraising history for Solana?
Yeah, so we raised a small seed round in early 2018 where Multicoin participated, and we started building the relationship from there. And it was pretty clear pretty quickly that the actual people from Multicoin were fairly indispensable to us. So from our perspective, it was easy in 2019 as we thought about raising a $20 million round that Multicoin should lead that round and that we should have them participate in a pretty significant way.
Let's get into a deeper question there that invites is, aside from Kyle and myself, we really have tried to build out the Multicoin team to help out portfolio companies. So could you tell us a little bit more about who else you work with at Multicoin and maybe some things they've been able to do to help Solana?
It's been really amazing watching the Multicoin team grow, and I now am in a state where when I see someone new get added, I get really excited because my brain starts spinning about all the ways that we can work together with that person. And so JR, I think, sticks out as someone that I've personally built a really deep relationship with, as a colleague and as a friend. JR has taught us almost everything we know about how to run a PR strategy, how to create a positioning strategy, how to handle messaging, how to get pulled through in media, how to pitch with the press, even just things like the difference between an embargo and an exclusive, for example. These are all things that we just didn't know at all, and now we actually feel pretty comfortable about because JR was hands-on with us in our first major PR pushes, and has kind of evolved into sort of a coach as we do a lot more of the hands-on stuff in-house. Mabel Jiang has also been super fundamental in our strategy and the recruiting and the coordination and training of folks in our team and in our community that support Solana's awareness and adoption in the Chinese markets. So it's very rare to see a firm that can support both in the Western sphere and the Eastern sphere. I haven't really seen that before, but Multicoin really straddles that nicely. I think Mabel has been a pretty fundamental part of that strategy, and she is similar to Kyle and Tushar, always willing to roll up her sleeves and get really hands dirty on. Let's say guiding and mentoring some of our Asian community admins, getting really hands-on in her native language of Mandarin in our Chinese communities, and also coaching us and bringing in introductions to pretty key partners that come out of the East.
Yeah, the thing I would add about Mabel, so Mabel joined in December of 2019, which was well after we made led that $20 million round for Solana in middle of 2019. And she didn't know a lot about Solana when she first joined Multicoin. She's really gone out of her way to help and understand Solana from first principles, understand why it's special, and then really opened up her entire Rolodex and all of her relationships in China to help Solana get out there, get awareness, and ultimately get developers building on this thing to push it forward.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like she joined, I think, in at least a year or more after you guys actually did that original investment. And it's been amazing to see the culture at Multicoin where there isn't this ownership of I brought in the deal and so I'm the one who owns the deal and I'm the one who does the work and I get the credit for it. There's never any fear on our end of reaching out to someone else in the team or having Mabel come in and be really hands-on even though she wasn't originally part of bringing in the deal. And so that's also rare. It's not often something that you see in venture firms where you have an open dialogue with everyone in the firm, not just the partner or the associate or whoever that brought the deal in.
And it's been cool now to kind of go full cycle where one of our early analysts, Ben, he was coming up on his 2-year mark at Multicoin, and he said, "Hey guys, I want to go find an operating role in the crypto ecosystem." And I remember Raj, you had mentioned you were looking for someone to kind of lead strategy, help out with just all kinds of analytics and how to navigate the space. And it was just a pretty obvious and natural fit. And so connected Ben to you. And I think Ben's first day was just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we're super excited to have Ben. I can't stress enough how important and how valuable it is to have someone who can hit the ground running with the high level context of why the thesis drove the investment, how you guys have been viewing Solana in the competitive landscape, and having actually done some really hands-on work. He got really in the weeds on helping us evaluate our social community and developer relations strategy. And from that work, it was pretty immediate to me that immediately clear to me that Ben would be able to hit the ground running, actually implementing and doing a bunch of the stuff that he recommended. So I'm super enthused that Ben's been able to join the team.
All right, let's pivot a little bit and maybe talk about what's going to be coming up for Solana in the future. So, everyone's heard of Serum at this point, and I think a lot of people are really excited about Serum. Can you tell us a little bit about, from the Solana side, some of the engineering work and how the teams really came together for Serum? I think that's a really interesting story because it almost felt like this Manhattan Project type scenario.
Honestly, like nothing I've ever seen before. The idea to execution timeline, I think, was something like 30 to 45 days of actually, coming together, understanding and verifying that Solana was the right blockchain for the Serum team to get started, and also understanding and verifying on our end that we were gonna be ready and willing to provide engineering resources to support their launch. What happened in that 30 to 45 days was there were a number of dependencies that probably were sort of second or third tier risk categories or blockers for the Serum team to get started and have a really successful launch. And we brought together something like 14 or 15 teams from across the industry, literally just calling everyone up. It's like I imagine the Manhattan Project was, right? Like, stop teaching your physics course at Columbia and come, work on this project because it's really important. And it was pretty phenomenal. Everyone, more or less dropped what they were doing. These are people from our community, people that had been introduced to us from Multicoin, some 2 or 3 years prior, people that were in our validator network who were super technical and understood the stack of Solana and how to work with it. People that have projects on other blockchains that have the technical expertise. I would say all in all is maybe 50 people that all came together to make it happen. So this is bridges, wallets, work on the Explorer, and also some protocol level work that we had the capacity to do, but were really helped by having these extra teams pitch in.
I mean, it's really hard to talk about Serum without talking about Sam. So what has it been like working with Sam?
Sam never sleeps, and so he definitely sets the pace of how much we can be available and respond to new movements in the market. And also he's just a really dynamic entrepreneur with a clear vision, and that clear vision is aligned with something we expected to see out in the market at some point, which is a fully permissionless, open, decentralized exchange with a central limit order book completely on chain. And Anatoly said that this was probably something that was going to happen. We had talked about it for years. Sam clearly has the drive and the willpower and the resources to go and actually make that happen. And so working with Sam has been largely at this point it's an SLA. There's requirements that just continue to grow day to day as he grows and evolves the ecosystem and the user base of Serum. And so it's been a nice integration test and performance benchmarking test for Solana. Actually having a user and an application as intensive and demanding as Serum has been a very focusing thing.
Sam was thinking about doing something like Serum, and he tried to fiddle with some stuff on Ethereum. He looked at all the major chains, and there was a call that was on July 16th, U.S. time, July 17th in the morning in Hong Kong. That call was scheduled. I remember it was 10 o'clock for me, 8 o'clock for Anatoly, and it was like 11 a.m. or something for Sam. And the call was scheduled for 30 minutes, and Sam wanted to look at Solana and talk about it and talk about performance. And the call went for 2.5 hours. And by the end of the phone call, Sam was already saying, how do I invest in Sol? And how do I test this thing? And I want to swing a wrench at this thing and make sure all these claims that I think I'm seeing are real. So at the end of the phone call, I created a Telegram group with Sam, Anatoly, a bunch of the engineers. All the engineers got added to the group within 5 minutes. I went to bed, and then we woke up the next morning. I remember I had a message from Anatoly, and Anatoly said, dude, I think someone's spamming the Solana network. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I think it's the FTX engineers they wanted to call bullshit, and they started spamming the network, and the network held up. And so all that happened within the first 6 to 12 hours after that call. And by the end of the weekend, Serum was now a project and was ready to go, and there were now a dozen plus engineers running full speed by the end of the weekend. And so that happened. Serum V1 launched about 6 weeks later, and now just seeing the pace at which new stuff is shipping and the ecosystem is moving is truly remarkable. I've never seen just this amount of sheer resources, financial capital, and market understanding and resources at this confluence of things come together so quickly. It's a pretty wild thing to see. So one other thing I think is really interesting to think about with Serum is thinking about latency. So one common pushback I've heard is an on-chain order book doesn't make sense because block times are 400 milliseconds and NASDAQ is 100 nanoseconds or whatever it is. And that the longer the latency, the more volatility you have. And Sam and Anatoly and I had a pretty big discussion about this at one point. And we talked about how fast is fast enough? How do you think on a first principles basis about how fast is fast enough? And the kind of conclusion we all came to was, look, at the end of the day, markets move based on to some degree information and then momentum. Those are kind of the two things that generally move markets. And so what is the rate at which information propagates through the world such that computers and humans can react? And our general kind of conclusion is that time scale is measured in seconds. 1 to 5 seconds is probably that time scale. even like AI that like reads, a tweet or a press release and then trades on it, like even that takes, at least a few hundred milliseconds, if not longer. And so it's unnecessary to have to get latency down to the nanosecond timescale for these to work. Obviously, spreads can compress as you get the latency lower, but like you can still, like the point of good enough and the point of this can actually work to support, trillions of dollars of trading is the point at which the latency of the system mirrors the rate at which information propagates through the world, and people can respond to that. And so that's one thing that makes us feel really good that like Solana and Serum are right there at the point where you can actually run massive volumes of trading through the thing.
Kyle, can you tell us a little bit more about Serum? What is it, in your opinion?
So if you look at the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or any of these major exchanges, you've got effectively a single server somewhere, and you've got people placing limit orders on the order book, and then you've got people crossing the spread, placing market orders who want to buy or sell whatever the asset is. Obviously, those are all super low latency systems, like 10 to 100 nanosecond kind of timescales. Obviously, very high performance, tens of thousands of transactions per second, if not more. And like the vast majority of the world's trading activity takes place in that basic architecture. Probably something like 5 nines or 6 nines worth of trading activity kind of happens in that way on these electronic automated systems. Blockchains are pretty obviously useful for storing assets and managing assets and trading assets, but Ethereum's block times are 15 seconds today. Bitcoins are 10 minutes, and a lot of the new next generation chains are in the 1 to 5 second range. But so Ethereum came out, had smart contracts, made it easy to issue assets. People started to realize, hey, a useful thing to do is to trade assets. And so you had people starting to design different ways to do trading on top of Ethereum. The first major one was called EtherDelta. It launched in 2016. And EtherDelta had the order book on chain. So people would place limit orders. Those limit orders would live on the blockchain, which means it took 15 seconds at least to get the limit order on the chain, potentially 15 seconds to get the limit order off the chain, as well as 15 seconds to match orders. Markets are volatile. Crypto markets are extra volatile. 15 seconds is just like, that's a lot of time for prices to move. And if you're a market maker, that's going to be pretty painful to have that much volatility move against you. So people have been trying to figure out ways to enable trading on Ethereum for the last few years. There was a whole group of people focusing on off-chain order books that settle on-chain, which improves on some of those dynamics, although it doesn't fully solve the problems. But it's kind of been relatively clear that like, hey, in an ideal world, if you have the performance, wouldn't it be great if you can have the full blockchain, the full order book on-chain? And the kind of key requirement there is you need to have low latency because market makers can't just leave limit orders on the book if prices are moving. They have to be able to cancel orders and readjust prices. And you have to have sheer amount of throughput because, again, market makers are placing all these orders and people are crossing the spread with market orders all the time. It was very clear, Sam runs Alameda. Alameda is probably one of the top 3 or 4 largest liquidity providers in all of crypto. He understands in a very fundamental way, what does market making mean? What does it mean to provide liquidity? And it was obvious to him that like the holy grail of all of DeFi is going to be having an on-chain order book where the orders are censorship resistant now, and those orders are now composable with other systems, with automated market makers, with leverage systems, perpetual contracts, whatever. And it was clear to him that like that's the holy grail. And so he was looking for that foundation. And when he saw Solana's performance, he realized pretty quickly like this is approaching the limits of physics given the constraint of having hundreds of nodes all over the world. And he realized, okay, I can actually put an on-chain order book on the system and facilitate high volume trading. Now for some context, right, Solana's block times are 400 milliseconds. NASDAQ is called 100 nanoseconds. So obviously, like any distributed system like Solana is still going to be much slower than NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. So I don't think any of us really view Serum as like a direct competitor, those kinds of large, centralized, trusted exchanges. What instead I think of Serum as is offering a different set of features and traits, which is it's permissionless, it's open to literally anyone in the world, right? Like you and I can't trade on the New York Stock Exchange directly. We go through brokers. But what's cool is Serum is completely open to anyone to trade directly on the exchange. So you just kind of get new kinds of benefits and trade-offs that we think just opens the market for people to access assets, trade assets, and move money around in a way that wasn't possible before. And that's what's so exciting about Serum is it's just like it's a step order improvement in what is possible for open permissionless trading.
DeFi has really gotten very hot over the past few months. And a lot of DeFi is happening on Ethereum right now. How do you envision the future of DeFi as Ethereum gas fees are so high? And how do you expect Solana to play a role in the future of DeFi?
Clearly, I think 2020 has created an environment, through the DeFi craze and boom, that has started to make the market ask some pretty hard questions. And those really hard questions often kind of end up with the idea that Solana is going to be really important, and it's kind of undeniable in this growing ecosystem of chains and projects and tokens that we call like the blockchain space. And so we always kind of think of it as providing the most performant block space for tokens, projects, computation, storage, anything that you need to make a successful project. That all lives on Solana. And so we've built the bridges and kind of have enough of a user base and a community around Serum and through the developer community on Solana for DeFi developers to either consider building new projects on Solana or bridge their existing projects over. It's at this point, a pretty inbound type of thing. If any DeFi developer has already built something on Ethereum or is thinking about where to bring their vision to life, and performance, costs, latency, gas fees, any of that is going to be a blocker, it's at this point, it seems like a fairly natural thing that they approach the Solana team, join our Discord, and start asking about how they can bridge over to Solana or start on Solana natively. I think we're going to see more projects starting natively on Solana through the next year.
What's pretty clear about DeFi now, for anyone who's used DeFi on Ethereum, right? You have some Ether. You go to you go to Uniswap, trade it for stablecoin. You go to Curve and trade it for another stablecoin. You put that in Compound. You can lever it up. The whole process is honestly kind of magical. Like, if you think about doing the equivalent actions in the traditional financial system, you'd be paying, just the time would be measured in days to move money between these different places and to do these things. You'd have to fill out a ton of forms. It'd just be really a slow, miserable process. Using DeFi on Ethereum, it feels like you have cash in your hand and you're just going and like moving the money around in the way you might want to move the money around. And so once you've done that enough times, it's clear that like that is the future of money. The problem is just like sometimes your transactions get stuck in the mempool for 6 hours. The gas fees sometimes get really high, and so like we can see the template for what the future is. It's just clear that like it's not quite there, but like the framework is now complete. And so what's so exciting to me about kind of where Solana is you have the same open permissionless nature of Ethereum, smart contracts, all those good things, but blocks are 400 milliseconds, right? Like the system's performance is going to rival what consumers expect out of all applications on the internet today. And so I'm optimistic that over the next 12 months or so, the market's kind of consensus is going to be like, wait a second, you can have the benefits of permissionless, censorship-resistant, open money, and also the performance that rivals consumer Web 2 applications. We can have the best of both worlds. And I think that's going to become a lot more apparent to a lot more people pretty soon.
Yeah, the analogy that I have in my head is the legacy financial system reminds me of like telephones and fax machines, right? Very structured, and you can make pretty flexible things on it. Like the current financial system is very sophisticated and has lots of moving pieces, but the connections in between those pieces are very limited and very strictly structured. Then I see Ethereum as kind of being dial-up, where it shows flexibility. Everyone can throw up their own web page and can show like a lot more creativity, and you can see a lot more just design space opening up, but it's really hampered by how you access it, right? I still remember being a kid and like yelling down to my sister to like get off the phone so I could dial into America Online, right? And so that's what Ethereum feels like to me, where it's like, hey, please stop sending transactions now so I can send mine through without it being a 1,000 GUI gas fee or something. And then what I really want is broadband. I want broadband, and I think Solana is broadband. And so I think these historical analogies are helpful to think about because it gives you a framework to see how innovation moves forward, and it allows you to remind yourself that the thing that feels super innovative right now is not necessarily what the future is going to look like. The future needs to improve on certain key performance attributes. Something can have proven out the design space, but may not be the ultimate solution. To pivot a little bit, in Q4 2019, Solana's testnets really started to stabilize. And then you had mainnet go live earlier in 2020 as well. Can you tell us some stories about how that process was, and people starting to tinker with the testnets, and just some good war stories there?
I think some of the stuff that started to solidify was we had this thesis and this conviction and this focus that the most important thing was to get the base layer shipped live on mainnet, decentralized, censorship resistant, open, permissionless. Like, it had to be all of these things, and that making nice tutorials and demos or creating like a reference implementation for some of the killer use cases that we would expect to see was less of a priority. But the first demo that really started to emerge as kind of a like a brain-breaking thing was the break demo. And really that kind of came out of an internal like integration test process where we wanted to have key management and authentication across clients for anyone able to access it. Not a command line interface, have it in the web browser, and show confirmation and finality of transactions in real time, and do it in kind of an unpredictable way through like keyword inputs. So this is above the fold on our webpage. Anybody can go and use this demo now. But it became pretty clear that when showing people this demo and showing the transactions actually clearing and clicking through to the block explorer and seeing everything happen more or less like sub-second, that all the builders in the space, everyone who had a vision for what they wanted to do with blockchain, and had the very visceral feeling of fear and anxiety and uncertainty of not seeing a transaction hash show up on an explorer, or waiting several minutes and having lots of back and forth with the counterparty to say, are you sure you sent it to the right address? All of that just sort of melted away, and I think people started to feel that that aha moment of what you were describing. Like, this is broadband, it's here, and it's live, it's permissionless, it's decentralized, it's happened. We're now past that point. I think that started to get people like Sam from Serum and other folks that we've been working with started to get their gears moving on what they could build, and so that was a pretty watershed moment for us.
A general rule of thumb in crypto is you can market something aggressively, and even if it's not out, like, you can get people bought into the vision. And obviously that's kind of intrinsically true for all of venture, but I think in crypto it's rewarded even more than it is in traditional venture investing. And one thing that I was actually pretty frustrated with the Solana team was, like, you guys weren't doing that. You weren't like hosting hackathons and like promoting your SDK and all those things over the course of the 2019 period, when a lot of other of your peers were doing that stuff. And I thought you really needed to. And I remember both you and Anatoly pushed back and said, no, man, we need to focus. We just need to ship this thing. And you guys shipped, despite raising far less money than all of your competitors, you shipped well before them. It turns out, like, now with even just call it 6 months of hindsight from there, like, it's painfully obvious to me that you guys made the right decision, because shipping first and being there and proving to the world all of your claims are for real was more important than like getting people hacking on a beta version of your SDK 12 months ago. And that's what enables stuff like Serum to now start moving to Solana. And having like a hacky demo that someone threw together over a weekend just didn't matter. So I think a lot of people in crypto really, myself included at the time, just kind of looked at this the other way. And so I have a lot of respect for you guys for having the focus and discipline and saying, no, 100% of our energy and effort is we have to get mainnet out the door, and we have to do it as soon as possible. And that, I think, turned out to be a very prescient decision.
If I had to boil down one big component of the Solana thesis, it's basically Like, blockchain is cool. A lot of great promises. Everybody's already made those promises. People have had these visions. They've described these visions for what the future looks like with blockchain. But if it's going to actually happen, and happen in a way that can disintermediate, trillion-dollar segments of the global economy, what does it actually need to look like? What kind of infrastructure is required for that to happen and be competitive with centralized solutions from a user experience perspective, from a cost perspective? And so, yeah, we weren't really focused on building like a nice demo. In our minds, if we actually got the thing done of building that performant network that could underpin that future global economy and nobody ended up using it, then that means this whole thing is a failed experiment anyway, and we should all go home and return our money to the investors and everything, right? And what happened was, we did ship it, and I think Sam is probably the earliest, loudest, most public example of someone who had something that uniquely was enabled by this blockchain. Needed this performance, needed to be open, decentralized, check all the boxes, and got to market really, really quickly. But we're just going to keep seeing more and more of those, especially through the next year.
Yeah, I think just to add on to this point, like a core philosophy that I have, and this applies to investing, but it also applies to anything else that could be considered investing, like HR and hiring and such, is invest based on strength, not lack of weakness. And I think that the contrarian nature there of, no, we are going to focus on shipping and we're going to focus on performance. Everyone else can go focus on hackathons and building out like all of the extra developer tools on top. They can all compete over there. What we're going to compete on is we're just going to have the best possible base layer and then everything else will come afterwards. And so that really stood out to me as focusing on strength, not lack of weakness, because I never want to make an investment based on a checklist. I don't want to say, okay, has beta SDK, has developers like writing code that is never actually going to be in production, like months before mainnet launches because they want to convince investors that it's worthwhile. Has X, has Y, has Z. It's really focused on like what is the core thing, what is the core bet here, what is the strength, and then make a bet on that instead. Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about Multicoin's future involvement with Solana?
Today we work with the Solana team pretty closely. I mean, we strategize on messaging, PR, those kinds of things. Obviously, we talk with you, Raj, and Anatoly about kind of broader strategic stuff. We have strategy sessions every now and again to kind of reorient ourselves and make sure we're all moving in the same direction. So that stuff we'll kind of continue as just like we're large investors and close with you guys. The last few years has been investing in infrastructure. And that is hopefully and should get commoditized, and we can say, okay, great, like all this works, now we can build applications on top. And so we're really looking forward to investing in the next wave of applications that are uniquely enabled by Solana. I think as Tushar alluded to a few minutes ago, that the kind of dial-up broadband analogy makes sense. And there were a lot of people who like had big visions for internet applications, and it turns out like you just can't run Netflix on 56K. And so like we can't wait to invest in that whole kind of new set of investable opportunities. And I think we're really fortunate that we've been very public vocal supporters of Solana. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs are going to end up calling us for that reason. Obviously, we're also very close with you all. And so I'm really excited that like we're going to have unique insights and unique deal flow to see kind of this next wave of broadband enabled applications.
Yeah, when we see really promising teams come to us because they have a vision and they kind of look at what's the most performant way to bring that vision to life. Often we end up sending them your way, and I like to hear you guys' perspective. And those teams seem to benefit a lot from having you guys as a sounding board and helping them understand how they can get to market. So it's very symbiotic, I think.
Raj, in what ways has Solana grown since you launched testnets in 2019? And can you tell us some stories about that evolution?
Yeah, so the team has actually grown not that much since 2019. I mean, we were around 20 people back then. We're around 25, 26 now. So really capital efficient, and we have a very high bar for hiring. But with those people and with the network growing and maturing, we've seen a lot of I think roller coasters. So definitely a lot of stories. We launched the mainnet in March, and I think there was about 90 days of just getting hit in the face. So as somebody from a product manager background, I always say like the first time you launch anything, you're just going to get punched in the face. It's just with a left or a right or an uppercut or what, right? I think from our perspective, there was probably less of a stressful journey on the network side, and more of a stressful journey on marketing and rolling out to exchanges and getting liquidity and having the retail market have awareness of us. And Multicoin was super helpful in that entire journey. But since March, we've grown from around, I think, 80 validators on the network to right now about 180. And it's growing pretty quickly. The testnet right now has around 350 validators. So the network is growing and becoming very decentralized and global. That validator community is growing, and a lot of the validators, after they get to a point of understanding the stack and having their infrastructure ready for receiving delegation and staking, they're also turning toward how do I contribute to this community? How do I contribute to the protocol? How do I help Solana get adoption? And so some of these validators are also the people that are right in the thick of it in DeFi and really understand the newest trends and what to launch and how to do run different yield farming strategies. And so those validators are kind of helping and building a lot of the primitives that are going to help a lot of the DeFi projects come over in the next several months. On the developer side, we've got these communities kind of springing up, especially in the consumer internet side of things. It's clear that the performance solves problems that are important for end users that are in entertainment as well as in finance and trading. A lot of the experimentation there is very community driven. People are playing, they're experimenting, they're launching personal tokens, they're launching social platforms for using blockchain and tokens to incentivize adoption and engagement across a community. And I think what we care about there is just that there's an open dialogue, that there's a lot of helping each other out. And so there's probably like 12 to 20 folks and growing. A lot of them having already experimented in Ethereum and tried to do different things in gaming and consumer internet, and now are kind of looking at Solana as the place to see their visions really kind of come true. One other big recent milestone I think really made the headlines and probably people are already aware of, but integrating Tether and having Tether support Solana and natively issue on Solana was a big milestone for us. Obviously having fiat-backed and fiat-pegged stablecoins on a layer one is something that you can only do with the security guarantees of a layer one, and a lot of the layer twos aren't really gonna have those things. And so we've been really excited. They're moving super fast. All the other components of the existing DeFi ecosystem are moving into place pretty quickly here.
So Raj, help us see the future a little bit. What are some upcoming milestones or releases that you're really excited about for Solana?
I mean, it's really a phase shift for the protocol and for the company. We've now gotten past over like 110, 115 days of mainnet being live, and inflation is right around the corner to be turned on. So completely feature complete, and our focus turns more toward what are the tips of the spear for adoption, and how do we build in a way that supports that adoption. It's all happening a lot faster than I think we expected. So what ends up normally happening is teams are approaching us, they have a vision or they've already built something out, they're hitting scaling issues, and they need help. And so we're thinking and figuring out how to take that Manhattan Project style coordination of resources across our community, the validator community, the developer community, and scaling that and making it work at I think a much higher throughput of projects coming online. And we're also working on how to prioritize time and grants and resources and support, marketing support for projects that are building on Solana. I can't say that there are a lot of great examples of how to do these things right, probably a lot of examples of how to do them wrong. And so there's a lot of, I think, innovating on how to build a community that's fair, that supports projects that are accreting value, that are positive sum, yeah, a lot of it really just depends on people. So what we spend a lot of time on now is meeting builders in the space, talking to them about their visions, understanding how to help bring those visions to life, and a lot of the times, Solana kind of unlocks something for them that's new. So that's where we spend a lot of our time now.
Well, thanks, guys, and thank you, Raj, especially for coming and joining us today. Much
Anytime.
appreciated.
Yeah.
Raj, thank you. It's been awesome working with you so far, and I can't wait to see what 2021 and the future is going to bring for Solana.
Likewise.